Imagine a private club where presidents, prime ministers, international bankers and generals rub shoulders, and where the people running the wars, the markets, and government say what they never say in public.
Estamos en los inicios de la Guerra Fría. Es una guerra que no sabe cuánto va a durar, durará pues hasta 1989, pero en 1954 eso está todavía muy crudo, muy incierto y en una fase inicial. Entonces, han empezado a rodar ya las Naciones Unidas y se vislumbra la necesidad defensiva de la OTAN. Luego, por otra parte, en Europa, las monarquías europeas sienten endogámicamente esa necesidad de defender sus propios intereses, intereses de estatus social, intereses económicos y también intereses de defensa hacia el exterior. Estados Unidos asume esa postura común, pero tomando la dirección.
Well, the real reason for the interference of the CIA with Bilderberg was actually the Cold War. It was coming up at that time, and they tried to use all the institutes they could get to steer the public opinion in Europe, and actually also in the rest of the world where they had influence. And Bilderberg was one of them, and that was the reason that they financed Bilderberg, the first meeting. Not totally, but for a great part anyway.
No, they're absolutely a continuation of Venice, because basically you had a migration of the Venetian system of oligarchical power over Europe into the Low Countries, in fact, into the Netherlands, where Bilderberg was really founded. And it's an absolute continuity of the Venetian system of power. And in fact, if you do some tracing of some of the family lineages, you'll find in many instances the Tournan-Taxis family, for example, migrated from Venice into Northern Europe and still remain a mainstay of the Bilderberg oligarchical structures. You have a Bilderberg meeting taking place once a year, beginning in 1954. The first meeting took place at the Bilderberg Hotel in the Netherlands. And the host of that conference was Prince Bernhard, the Dutch royal consort, who was a card-carrying member of the Nazi apparatus during the Second World War period. Every year Bilderberg has a gathering. They'll bring together 100 to 200 people, many of whom make up the core of the transatlantic financial and political oligarchy. And they'll bring together a core group of powerful individuals, government people, the media, finance, and prospective young recruits, people in the political realm who are up and coming and who are going to be seduced and controlled by these oligarchical interests. And very often these meetings serve as a kind of a testing ground for whether or not certain people will be advanced in their political careers, including a number of individuals who've been elected President of the United States have been put through this kind of Bilderberg finishing school process.
The Bilderberg Conference comprises about 130 of the world's, or Western world's, top decision makers, from the banks, the multinational companies, the EU Commission. I'm coming to the politicians, also from WTO, IMF, World Bank, and of course, leading politicians from the US, Canada, Eurozone, and the UK. And I think, though they were clearly discussing some of the biggest issues confronting the Western economies at this time, why have we had no statement, either from the Prime Minister, or from the Chancellor, or indeed from the Minister without portfolio, all of whom attended in an official capacity? Why did they offer no statement, even though such decisions may well have a significant effect on UK government policy or the livelihood of future UK citizens?
In May 1973, Bilderberg Group met at an exclusive resort at Saltsjöbaden, Sweden. The key point on the Bilderberg meeting agenda was the oil shock of 1973, the 400% targeted increase in the price of OPEC oil in the near future.
The oil shock, the hoax, it was in fact a hoax, of 1973, continuing into the late 1970s. And the whole point of the oil shock was to create a nominal flow of money into the hands of the Saudis and other Persian Gulf wealthy nations. The oil hoax ultimately created an enormous volume of wealth transfer nominally into the OPEC countries, the so-called petrodollars, but all of that money went right to London and Wall Street to be managed. So the financial oligarchy in its major centers used the oil hoax to establish an absolute domination over world credit to make sure that it no longer went for any development.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy?
Well, I've tried very hard not to believe in conspiracy theories, but I've been here now for over 15 years, and I can see there is a move towards supranationals. Just look at the IMF in Washington, supposed to be independent. Effectively, it's become a branch office of the European Commission, and I've got to know over the years the Van Rompuys, the Schultzes, the Barrosos, even the Junckers, the Timmermans, and it's completely clear they actually want to destroy the nation-state as a unit. A few years ago, the Greek Prime Minister said, I'll give you a referendum. He was removed and replaced by a former Goldman Sachs director. And whenever the project goes wrong, whether it's the euro has a crisis or the asylum crisis with the borders, every single time there is to these guys an opportunity. It's known as the beneficial crisis.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it, the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
As in a television soap opera, there are actually secret spin-off organizations similar to the Bilderberg Group who play a vital role in the New World Order scheme, in wealth concentrated in the hands of a few to exert world control.
In 1968, George Ball and the Bilderbergers met and determined that they had to restructure the entire world along the lines of a corporation. They decided that the idea of the nation state was outmoded, it was archaic, it was standing in their way, and that therefore they wanted to have what they called a world company based upon the idea of a corporate identity. What this is actually is part of what's called globalization. You had in the 60s and then continuing in an expanding form in the 70s and 80s a rash of mergers which corporations merged, agricultural corporations merged, the financial institutions merged, and you had a general takeover of the world economy by these huge mega firms. The corporate banking mergers tended to control the corporate industrial mergers and the agricultural mergers. So you had basically a world run by this these massive financial institutions.
E mentre qui ci vengono presentate delle soluzioni, una decina di giorni fa, nel chiuso e nel segreto delle riunioni del club Bilderberg, molti esponenti dell'alta burocrazia e delle leadership politiche europee si sono riuniti probabilmente per dare le direttive alle direttive che poi verranno presentate al Parlamento europeo, che non potrà fare altro che esaminarle. Anche ho sentito questa mattina il Presidente Barroso l'invito a portare aiuto agli amici greci. Non vorrei che l'aiuto fosse soprattutto al suo amico armatore Spiro Lazis. C'è un evidente conflitto di interessi per il signor Barroso e dovrebbe darne spiegazioni.
L'Europa oggi è sotto il dominio dei poteri forti e purtroppo anche dei poteri occulti.
L'Unione Europea con l'euro e la Banca Centrale Europea ha espropriato i nostri popoli di un bene prezioso, la sovranità monetaria. Non siamo più padroni della nostra moneta e quindi del nostro futuro. E questo è molto grave, perché noi crediamo invece nell'Europa dei popoli e delle regioni, quindi della libertà. Poteri occulti che si nascondono dietro figure di personaggi che vengono imposti con le loro decisioni sulla pelle dei popoli, sulla testa dei nostri popoli. E sono sempre banchieri.
It is about the building of an empire, and the paradox of this project, of this supranational European project, is the least popular it becomes with the people, the bigger mess it creates, the more power they get at the centre.
Well, with the Lisbon Treaty, European nations have lost almost their entire sovereignty, and we are now back to a pre-nation state condition, meaning feudalism.
Was an absolutely willful act on the part of precisely this Bilderberg apparatus.
Not really the idea of capitalism, because in the end what these people have or are, they already control 90% of the planet. Every aspect of society everything you eat, everything you look at, everything you touch, mostly is in the private hands of these billionaires today.
Role of the Club of Rome back in the 1970s was to try to popularize the big lie that man could not continue to develop because resources were supposedly limited. And they used a ridiculous modernized version of the old argument of Malthus and Aristotle to simply state that based on mathematical equations, we would exhaust the resources.
Well, yes, there was another reason, and that is that the bailout was a scam, a fraud. It was under the guise of saving banking institutions, which they saved temporarily. They were effectively taking unpayable debt, huge quantities of unpayable debt, and transferring it from private corporations to governments. This didn't make the debt any more payable. They basically absorbed huge quantities of worthless paper, speculative derivative paper, which could not be paid off in any period of time anyway, i.e. the governments became bankrupt. Now you see this in Europe over the last years, where each country is being forced to do the same thing that was done in the U.S., take on the massive debts of these banks and effectively leaving them bankrupt. What you have is the growth of corporate dictatorships under the banking institutions that run the governments, corporate fascism. And in fact, you see the world increasingly coming under the control of corporate fascist governments under the control of the banking institutions.
Well, the primary goal is to defend the status of a unipolar world, even if that means to prepare a preemptive global first strike. The oligarchy want to defend their privilege to be a superior species, and they want to keep the rest of the population deliberately backward and stupid, and that is why they promote such banal entertainment, which is only aimed that people stop to think.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Look at Google, Apple, Microsoft, IBM. These Bilderberg-affiliated megacorporations form an integral part of the United States security apparatus. Behind these technologies, enormous streams of capital are being expended and, more importantly, invested behind the scenes.
Now we're at a point where that entire system is at a breaking point where it's hopelessly bankrupt. The debt is impossible to pay. The derivatives, which are purely speculative, unregulated gambling bets on top of the debt bubble itself, is estimated at $1.5 quadrillion, which is a multiplier of even the most optimistic idea of global GDP that's completely off the charts. So this entire system is doomed, and we're quite frankly at a point now where it would be no surprise if on any given day you woke up and found out that the entire transatlantic financial system had just evaporated.
A lot of people think that the British Empire no longer exists, but this is an illusion. Just ask yourself, why is it that after the big financial crash of 2007, 2008, there was absolutely nothing done by the G20 or anybody else to re-regulate the banking system? And they kept quantitative easing, they kept zero interest rate policy, which is really expropriating the majority of the population. And now we are in front of an even bigger crash than 2008, and there are no so-called tools anymore to do anything about it. So The reason is that the oligarchy controls what is called globalization, and globalization is really only another word, another notion for the British Empire. It is the combination of central banks, investment banks, hedge funds, private equity funds, insurance and reinsurance firms who control what is generally called the global financial system. And in reality, the EU is only the continental sub-entity of that empire.
Well, the British Empire knows that in the long run it cannot survive in a world which is based on science and technology and development. And therefore their policy is to stop that kind of technology and development. That's why they target nation states. That's why, for instance, that they are adamant against the BRICS and the emergence of the BRICS, which is nations which have the strength and the power and the commitment and the mission to building nations through science and technology. That has to be stopped in their view. Therefore, their target is the idea of the nation state itself. Destroy nation states in order to preserve and maintain the power of the empire.
There is absolutely a plan to depopulate the world, and you simply have to listen to or read the writings of people like Prince Philip of Great Britain, who has stated explicitly that we should reduce the population of the world from 7 billion people down to 1 billion. He has stated very charmingly that he would like to be reincarnated as a virus to try to reduce the world's population.
We're in a lot of trouble.
No existe esa libertad. No sería inocentemente estúpido creer que un periodista es libre de escribir lo que él sabe que es verdad en un periódico, en una radio, en una televisión que no son suyos. El periódico o el medio que sea ni siquiera es del director. El periódico es de un grupo de empresarios. Y esos empresarios, a su vez, dependen de un entramado político, de un entramado económico. En el papel, para tener publicidad, para evitar problemas de censura, para tener libertad. No existe esa libertad.
Media is often altered to convince the public that something is happening that is not happening. There was a movie once made called Wag the Dog about a president who was involved in a scandal much like Bill Clinton with Monica Lewinsky. And the way they get out of the scandal, the White House concocts a war against Albania. During George W. Bush administration, there was a quote from Karl Rove, who was Bush's major political advisor. Rove said that the White House can create its own reality, and if they don't like the reality they have created, in 30 minutes they can change it because the White House has total influence over the way the media reports the news.
Una congiura del silenzio. Non si vuole far sapere all'opinione pubblica chi veramente comanda i poteri forti, le loro riunioni, il Bilderberg, la trilaterale, che si riuniscono a porte chiuse, senza che nessuno possa sentire, nessun estraneo, e soprattutto riferire ai popoli cosa si è deciso sul loro futuro. Noi combattiamo questa dittatura dei poteri occulti e riteniamo che il potere debba essere restituito ai nostri popoli. Questa è democrazia, e perciò quando qualcuno di noi riesce a far comunicare all'opinione pubblica queste verità, si cerca di screditarlo, di chiamarlo cospirazionista.
Mr. Speaker, this is the first occasion for me, as I've never previously answered a question in the House of Commons on behalf of a private organisation for which the government has no responsibility. The Bilderberg organisation exists for the purpose of holding meetings once a year in various countries. It exists for no other purpose. And this year the meeting was held at a lodge hotel near Watford in Hertfordshire. I didn't receive adequate notice of this question as it happened, so that I wasn't found in time to put to hand the list of those who participated and the agenda which we discussed, but we always circulate those before the meeting, and they're readily available, and I can certainly put any honourable member in touch with a source of the list of those who took part.
Each year we invite something over 100 people. It was about 140 this year, drawn from both sides of the Atlantic, from Europe, including Turkey, and from the United States and Canada. The people who attend are drawn from the worlds of government, politics, academia, defense, journalism. We all attend. The people who attend change slightly each year. There's a core of those who regularly attend. Different people come. Well, I'm trying to guess at what on earth people are asking a parliamentary question about before, and what they're interested in.
Well, some chosen journalists are admitted to the Bilderberg conference, but they are not allowed to write about it, what they hear and what they say, and it's actually completely forbidden. And they don't swear an oath, but they just promise that they are not allowed to. And that's why actually you never see in the papers, even in the big newspapers, good articles about the Bilderberg meetings and what is happening there, because journalists who are allowed to enter, they are forbidden to write about it.
No, en absoluto, no es normal que periodistas o directores o propietarios de medios asistan a unas reuniones donde se están dilucidando, se están debatiendo asuntos mundiales de importancia de la actualidad o del futuro inmediato, y que no informen de ello con el sentido clásico de la información, noticia, texto, titular, reportaje, entrevista. Pero, hay que decirlo, sí informan subliminalmente, indicando, dirigiendo lo que se debe decir desde esos medios, creando la moda opinativa. Ellos, podemos decir que asisten como convidados de piedra, pero luego van a partir de ahí a orientar la opinión pública hacia los intereses que se hayan establecido en esos debates.
Security was tight today at the Grove Hotel in this leafy area north of London. 140 members of the global elite arrived here for a top-secret, hush-hush, off-the-record conference in the English countryside. How's this for a guest list? The head of the International Monetary Fund, former Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, the heads of Amazon.com, Google, and BP Oil, former General and CIA Director David Petraeus, and what's a top-secret cabal of puppet masters without Henry Kissinger? All of them came here today for the Bilderberg Conference. That's Bilderberg, not Build-A-Bear. Participants are tight-lipped about discussions, other than to say topics will range from the economy to jobs to U.S. foreign policy, what the organizers call megatrends and the major issues facing the world. Reporters and outsiders are not allowed in, and everything is off the record. Organizers say that's so participants can take time to listen, reflect, and gather insight.
Un grupo de poder, un grupo de poderosos que no pertenecen a ningún gobierno nacional, pero sí son parte de un gobierno supranacional, un gobierno mundial. Ellos no adoptan decisiones ejecutivas, pero sí prefiguran y predeciden lo que ha de acontecer. Ellos diseñan los futuros convenientes en el escenario económico, en el escenario político, en el escenario defensivo.
Immediately after the terrorist attack against Charlie Hebdo at the beginning of this year, the former US Senator Bob Graham said that if the famous 28 pages of the original September 11 report would have been published, this attack would not have happened. Now, what this means is that the original September 11 Commission of the Congress published a report, and 28 pages are classified to the present day, but we more or less know what's in it. It pertains to the role of Saudi Arabia financing terrorism and Wahhabi Salafist attacks around the world. Now, this has another dimension, and that is that the Anglo-Americans have instrumentalized radical Islam since Brzezinski in 1975.
Humanity has almost destroyed itself a number of times. Immediately before the Golden Renaissance, there was the New Dark Age. There was the Black Death, where about half of the population of Europe was destroyed not only by a disease, the bubonic plague, but destroyed by the fact that men were convinced that they could not solve the problem. But fortunately, there was a new paradigm then. There was a renaissance. It was the Golden Renaissance of Leonardo da Vinci in Italy, of Miguel de Cervantes in Spain, of Shakespeare in London, which developed the concept of man, a new paradigm in which we organized our business as human beings based on the concept of man's morality, creativity, and free will. We cannot have a situation where, as in Greece, 60% of the youth have no jobs. That is killing the future of society. Or Spain, where it is almost at 60%. That is killing the future if youth don't have a mission and a purpose to fulfill.
Ways of talking about immortality. We all die. No one so far has discovered a method by which we can live eternally as in our biological form. So therefore, the meaning of the human mind and the human body may not be quite the same thing. For example, people like Einstein, for example, who over a century ago defined matter-antimatter progress, which we're now going into today. So some people are immortal because of the consequences of their having existed. And the best we can do as human beings, which no other animal can do, is we can continue to be immortal in our participation in the development of humanity and the development of our solar system. So immortality means one thing. It means these are the consequences of your having lived, the benefits for mankind of your having lived, one way or the other, as a poet or as a scientist or whatever. You contributed something to the wealth of humanity, and you are, in that sense, immortal. Or you can be a poor slug who doesn't think, who has no consequence, no reason to exist, who just lives and dies. And that's the choice.
Yes, we can win this war, but the first step necessary for actually winning is to know what the war is. The war is not against merely financial interests or military powers or even groups as powerful as the Bilderberg group. It is a war against what has been called powers and principalities. It's a war against a concept of man which is evil. It's the concept of man that we are nothing other than animals. It is an idea which says that human beings do not have the capability of a creative spark, that we do not in fact have free will, that we therefore cannot act morally or immorally, we just simply do whatever our desires say. And it is that concept of man which finds expressions today in things like the Bilderberg Group and in the global financial system, which is based on speculation, usury, and the destruction of populations.